Imagine waking up one day feeling trapped in the same old routine, weighed down by invisible barriers that seem almost impossible to break through. You're struggling with addiction, battling inner demons, or simply feeling disconnected with your purpose. These challenges can make you feel like you're living on autopilot, maybe even disconnected from the vibrance, meaning of life. And yet, there is a way for us not just to overcome these obstacles, but for us to transform them into stepping stones towards becoming revolutionary men. So in today's episode, we're going to delve into the profound journey of breaking free from unconscious barriers and discovering the true essence of modern masculinity. And our guest is going to guide us through some steps we need to do to reclaim our life, to re-strengthen our relationships, and engage our communities in a way that are both powerful and authentic. So I can't wait to get into this conversation. Now, before we get into today's episode, let's come to grips about one other thing, and that is inevitably there will come a time in our lives when we will hit a wall. Whether it's a marriage that's not working, a career or business that's stagnated, or maybe you have a personal life that's completely flatlined. So if you're dealing with any of these or a combination of them and you're finally fed up with where your life is at, allow me to help you get clear on what needs to get done and how to do that so you can get on living the life you were meant to live. Just go to the Awaken Man net and download the free Setting the Compass exercise. Get started today. And with that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awaken Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. As you listen to today's episode, think about the unconscious barriers that might be holding you back. What steps can you take to overcome these obstacles and become the best version of yourself? And then I want you to consider your definition of what modern masculinity looks like. How do you show up in your life, your relationships, and your community? What changes can you make to align more closely with your true purpose? It's our unconscious barriers or maybe even our blind spots that happen every day to everyone. And it is within these barriers that we are held back. And it's the biases, if left undetected and unmanaged, means the likelihood of us achieving our destiny, or at least the one you dreamed of, remain just that, a distant dream. So as men, how do we define ourselves? Masculinity go hand in hand with our unconscious barriers. And so how we go about addressing this is what today's conversation is all about. So allow me to introduce my guest. Marc Azoulay holds numerous licenses as a professional and addictions counselor, as well as being a certified group therapist. Marc is the founder of the Men's Therapy Online, and that's a community and healing hub for men who want to get back on their feet or take their lives to that next level. And with the help of a team of licensed clinicians, he provides ongoing men's groups, individual counseling, and powerful wilderness retreats for his members. He's got a background in psychoanalysis, neuroscience, and Buddhism. So Marc can help men uncover and destroy these unconscious barriers that continually hold them back. And his mission is to help men become the best versions of themselves and truly show up for their lives. Marc, welcome to the show today, my friend. How are things?
Thank you so much. That was an incredible intro. That was epic. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to sign up for the Awakened Man. That's
yeah. Right on. Thanks, my friend. We were just talking before we got on the show. That was on your podcast a little while ago, maybe about a year ago, and we got a chance to finally connect and return the favor. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I was so intrigued with your work, Marc. But as you know, here at the Revolutionary Man, we talk about everybody being on a hero's quest. And each of us will have encountered a defining moment in our lives that really changed the course of our destiny. So tell us about how that defining moment in your life, and how did you get through it, and how did that experience shape you into the man you are today and the work you're doing?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. I mean, I love the hero journey thing. I think that's what we talked about when you were on my show. And yeah, I guess I'll give the quick overview of my life, and you can dig in where relevant. So I started my life, and I was a nerd. I was like bullied into the ground. So I love the hero stuff. I was like a Dungeons and Dragons player, right? I was a nerdy kid, played video games, read fantasy books. Like that was my jam. Unfortunately, I was born in rural Maryland. So I got trashed. I mean, that's like football and army country, and I was like an overweight Jewish kid with glasses. I stood no chance. And in that experience, right, one, I really distanced myself from men because I really wasn't accepted into the world of men, being that I wasn't into sports primarily. And two, you talk about unconscious barriers. I had this idea that I kind of made up when I was a kid, which is there's something wrong with me, right? A lot of kids feel that way. And I would go to my parents and I would say, hey, what's wrong with me? Right? I'm getting bullied. I'm getting called names. I'm getting like pushed into lockers. What's wrong with me? And my parents did what any good parent would do, is they said, nothing is wrong with you. We love you. Right? There's nothing wrong. It's their fault. As a kid, I could not reconcile this, right? Because I was like, well, clearly something's wrong because other people don't get treated this way. So the unconscious barrier that I built when I was, call it whatever, 6, 7 years old, not only is something deeply wrong with me, everybody is lying, right? Nobody will tell me what it is. So there's this like mysterious demon, this kind of thing that I can't quite grasp that is always fucking with me, basically, right? That everyone can see, but nobody will tell me what it is. And that unconscious barrier is what really screwed me up. So I ended up kind of like hating myself, right? Being really depressed, again, really overweight, not interacting, isolating. I was lucky that I was born as the internet was arriving, not when it was already here. But I could have easily been like an incel or a red pill or some of these guys that are out there now that are just like isolating and, stuck in the bubble. Like I am the target audience. I was a target audience for that. So then I went to college and I decided to reinvent myself in a way that I did a lot of young men do, which is drugs, rock and roll, and sex. So I made this literally fake persona, what is kind of toxic masculinity, where I would just take any drug. I'll try to sleep with as many women as possible. Like worked out. I lost a good amount of weight, which that was positive from it. But like I didn't want to be seen as being weak or as saying no. So I ended up saying yes to a lot of stuff, right? Including heroin, including a lot of cocaine, including like drug dealing and committing crimes. Like just like did not want to look like a coward and did not want to look weak in front of everybody. So to answer your question more directly, a defining moment is I actually overdosed. So I overdosed on heroin, overdosed on opiates. I was not an IV user, but I did smoke it, and it led to an overdose all the same. And luckily, I was dating the RA in my college, and she had Narcan. So she Narcaned me. She saved my life. If she was not there, I would be dead. Full stop. Right? I would have been doing it alone in my dorm room, and nobody would have found me. But she was there, and that was a wake up call. That was a wake up call, not just to like, oh my God, shit got real, but a wake up call that I've been lying to myself this whole time. In an effort to break that unconscious barrier of I don't know what's wrong with me, but something's wrong with me. I tried to make everything wrong with me, if that makes sense. I tried to be that bad boy. I tried to be that damaged goods. I tried to be that like dramatic, romantic, tortured artist guy, right? Because I just wanted to be in control of that feeling that I had of things being wrong with me.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Geez, Marc, what an incredible story there. And I hadn't realized some of the stuff in my research. And what was really interesting, intriguing to me is, as a father of 2 boys as well, you think you're doing your sons a service as your father, as when your parents were saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. And now with your education and the men's work you're doing, how would you work with somebody who is going through a similar or has gone through a similar situation? As a parent, like what would we need to do differently to help our young men to evolve into better men?
Yeah. So I think this talks on the topic of the idea of masculine love and what masculine love is. And my definition is that masculine love is both being the challenger and the coach. So, as a father, our role is to set challenges that are the right level of challenge. I can't stress that enough, right? That aren't too hard, that crushes your kid. I think a lot of us had dads that set challenges that were just frankly too hard, and it destroyed our self-esteem, But also not being patronizing and saying things that are too easy that the kid accomplishes easy. A lot of millennials had that experience where we just like won all the time, And then we thought that we were like the smartest people in the world because we never failed. So you got to get that like perfect level of challenge. And that's an art and that's a skill. And that's like what fatherhood is. But then also being the coach to help your kid get to that challenge, right? So being like, here's the bar and I'm going to help you get there. So to answer the question, right? When a kid says, hey, what's wrong with me? Instead of just shutting down the conversation by saying like, there's nothing wrong with you, say like, what do you think is wrong with you? You know, getting curious. What would you like to improve on in your life? Where do you think you're lacking? And as your dad, I love you and we're going to get you there. You know, if someone had asked me that, if my parent asked me that, I would say, you know, I mean, I don't know if I would say it, but I hope I would say like, I'm really overweight and I don't like how I look. So my dad could have an opportunity of said like, you know what, I hear that. And like, how about we take some exercise classes together, you know, or how about we cook together and work on diet together? Or how about, you know, we like, I don't know, enroll you in a sport that works for you or whatever it is, right? Like something where it's connective and engaging, focusing on the real issues that I have instead of telling me that my issues are not real, which I think a lot of guys get, right? A lot of guys get this idea that like, yeah, your problems aren't real. And then we're just stuck alone because we obviously still feel like there's a problem, but it doesn't make it go away.
No, absolutely not. And, you know, and then what ends up by happening is that we start to lie to ourselves, right? And then it manifests and it shows up in in behaviors that what today we would call as toxic behavior, right? I'm not a believer in toxic masculinity. I believe there's toxic behaviors that exist, and that can exist in a wide spectrum. And so, because we're trying to cover for that, right? It's our coping mechanism, and you know, ultimately that's what you're doing. But you came through that other side, you know, and you were and realized that things needed to change. And so, you know, let's talk a little bit. Your work, a lot of the work that you do really is about helping men define what modern masculinity looks like. So what would be your definition of that?
Yeah. So I think there's twofold, right? I think the one thing is kind of where the industry is, and the next one is where I take it further. So I think where the industry is getting in touch with your feminine side, which I think is really critical and really important, right? I think if you talk to a lot of therapists, they're going to say that men need to be more sensitive, men need to be more in touch with their feelings, men need to be more nurturing and loving and being supportive, which is all true. And I do that the modern man is both in charge and both has a relationship with, maybe it's a better word than in charge, is in a relationship with their masculine and their feminine. And I think a lot of men do need to nurture their feminine side. But I think what the world is lacking is actually healthy masculinity. And what that looks like is very different than getting in touch with their femininity. It looks like being an ethical leader. You know, it looks like practicing mastery or being an artisan is how I talk about with like a lot of guys, like getting really good at a craft, whatever the craft can be. It doesn't matter what it is. I know you have a background in cooking, right? I love cooking, right? Like the idea of like getting really good at something. Again, the thing doesn't matter. I think that's where modern masculinity comes in. Like being good at traditionally female roles, like, I don't know, pottery or poetry, doesn't matter. It's about like being good and pursuing artisanal beauty in something, I think is very masculine, being a craftsman. You know, I think living with honor, right, is very masculine, of like doing the right thing even when it sucks, you know, even when it hurts. Yeah. I think building strength, right, and not just physical strength, but emotional strength, right? Being the person who shows up during a funeral, being a person that calls your friend when you know that they're going through a tough time, you know, being the person that delivers food when somebody is sick, right? That's real strength, especially in the modern era. It's more that emotional, social strength, less of the physical, you know, muscle man stuff. And the last one is courage, right? Which is the idea of being scared and doing it anyway, right? Similar, which is different from bravery, which is not feeling scared. Courage is like, I'm losing my shit right now, but I can still operate while I'm scared. You know, moving towards fear, seeing it as an invitation versus something to run away. So those four: strength, courage, mastery, and honor. Jack Donovan talks about that in his book, The Way of Men. I've built on it a little bit, I think, but those are what I think healthy masculine and modern masculinity is. And we don't have that. Yeah. You look around and like, who the fuck does that? Our role models suck right now. We don't, I mean, in the States, look at our candidates for president. I mean, what the hell? That's the best men we can throw up there. Like there's a huge gap right now in men that really demonstrate a healthy form of being in their masculine.
I completely agree with that. I think that is the struggle that we have today. And as you were going through your 4 points there, I was just thinking about a conversation I had this weekend with a young guy. He's done some work for us here in the house, and we developed this friendship. He's old enough to be my son, and he was telling me about how they have a little hobby farm, and we have this STARS program. It's a helicopter program that we use when people get injured and they can't get a regular ambulance into the location, or they have to get flown in really quickly to one of our hospitals. Anyways, what ended up happening is he followed the helicopter, and when he got there, he was there just in time to see this. He knew it was the farming couple. The son was getting his father out of a round baler. And you were talking about strength, not physical. He didn't need physical strength there. He needed emotional strength. Yeah. And that's what our friend was talking about. Like, the guy was just, could you imagine doing this, seeing your father, and supposedly only his head was sticking out of this bale, and you have to get him out of this piece of machinery. And I just thought, man, the courage and the fortitude that had to show up in that moment, was just unbelievable. And so that was what I was thinking about. That we need to have that ability, and the only way we get that ability is going through trial and tribulation. Right. And I know in your men's work, you guys deal with lots of different things, and so we know what it looks like to be a modern man. Now we've got our 4 pillars, and those are excellent. And so, what are some of the most common issues you're finding in your men's work?
So, I work with a lot of millennial generation, and I think a lot of, again, the masculine literature needs to catch up. So when you talk about a lot of the masculine books, they talk about deprogramming like the macho jerk, right? And that's like our dads, right? The guy that like isn't in touch with his emotion, the guy that drinks too much, the guy that's like shut down and stoic. Like a lot of millennials, like those are our dads. But what I see for my generation is the complete opposite. And there's a great saying in AA that is actually, 180 degrees from sick is still sick. And I think the millennials are sick in this way, is that like we went the complete opposite, where we became nice guys. We became people pleasers. We became ashamed of our masculinity. We became afraid of our power. We became really shut down and confused and lost. I mean, I can't tell you how many people of my generation like don't know what they care about. They're stuck in consumer mentality. They're just buying stuff, or they're just like, I don't know, trying to save up for a house, but they don't know why. They don't know where they want to live, and they're doing work that they're not connected to. Like, there's a lot of lost guys out there, and we're actually pretty meek as a generation. So a lot of this stuff around like the macho jerk doesn't apply to us, and a lot of guys bounce off of therapy for that very reason. But what I see with guys out there now is like actually needing to feel powerful but not feel oppressive, right? Because we don't want to be predators. We don't want to like hurt the people in our lives, especially the women in our lives. I think we really care about the women in our lives. But again, we've overcorrected. So it's this idea of like using male emotion to inspire and lead. And I always direct guys to, again, a couple generations back, like, people like Martin Luther King or Winston Churchill, where you watch and read some of their speeches that are full of emotion. They're very emotional men, but it's a masculine emotion that motivates and moves and, inspires a crowd to do something greater. Like, that is such a powerful thing compared to what I think a lot of guys think is emotion, which is like crying alone in your room, right? It's like you can use emotion to motivate and lead and protect and inspire. And I think when most guys see that, they're like, okay, I can see the value of emotion now. Like, I want to be that general that, commands my army to do great things.
Yeah, and it's about having that. It's really about harnessing that emotion and really being having an understanding of how to channel it. And I think because we haven't really been taught that. And I'm the father of 2 millennials, and you're absolutely right. What intrigues me or about my version and my idea of masculinity is slightly different for them. And unfortunately, they have fewer role models than we have. Like, I'm 58, so our role models of what masculinity looked like was Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, and this and lots of war for in growing up. Those are the images that I remember. I don't remember, and those are the kinds of stories you would see. It was 80s action-packed movies, and today, there isn't anything. Like you said, look at who we're not much better. I'm in Canada. We don't have much better leadership to choose from either, and I think it's because the good men just don't want to be bothered with this.
But I think that's the problem, right? I mean, I forget who said it, but that quote of like, when good men do nothing, evil thrives, right? Like I think that's happening. I think there are a ton of good men out there, but I think they're apathetic or they've disinvested from the systems. And then you have people that are able to take advantage, right? And move in and not inspire people, and I love that you brought up the 80s action star, specifically Arnold Schwarzenegger, or I mean, a little bit, I guess, after your time, but like The Rock, right? Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Yeah.
If you follow them now, those are actually two of my examples of like modern men, because in their older age, a lot of their content is about honor and ethics and about family and about the importance of fatherhood. Like they are actually continuing this tradition. And it's cool because they're jacked out of their mind. So like you respect them because they're huge, strong dudes, but they're actually both like quite eloquent and like super tender when you listen to them talk or give interviews or even some of their posts on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. The Rock came for me as a little bit down the road.
Yeah.
It would have been more, Hulkster for me. So I think of that in that era, but it was just the persona of, what it meant to be masculine, right? It was this rugged, stoic in the wrong way. I didn't really understand stoicism. Like my father hardly spoke, but when he did spoke, it was worth listening to. And so you would classify him as being very stoic, and not a lot of emotion. But I've learned, in my path, and I'm not sure if I doesn't bounce this off of you, but really being, strong, healthy stoicism to me is what you were talking about earlier. It's about reining in that emotion, having just the right amount of emotion in the right time, at the right moment, with the right person. I don't know what you think about that.
I agree, right? I mean, there's a couple metaphors that come to mind. One is used with my guys a lot, the metaphor of Zen archery versus Western archery, right? So like Western archery, it's about like shoot the arrow as far as possible and punch through like as many layers of armor as possible, right? Like if you can go, 300 yards and get through plate mail, you're a great archer, right? Whereas Zen archery, they actually use hay targets, right? And the idea is that you need to notch the arrow in the target. And if you go through the target, if you're too strong, you fail. So it's about controlling the force versus like, I'm going to punch it as hard as possible. It's not about distance. It's about control. And I think like as men, again, being the apex predator of planet Earth, right? Like I think we need to know that like men have dominated the earth. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Like we are aggressive. We are super aggressive, carnivorous creatures. But it's about how do we channel that force and channel that aggression. And just like you said, know like the right amount to apply so that we can knock that arrow where it needs to be rather than just trying to punch through everything with like, a rail gun or something, right? And I think that's the challenge of men. And again, I think the millennial generation, we don't even want to pick up the bow because we're afraid of it. And I think the boomer generation and maybe some Gen Xers, which you are, like, they just want to shoot as far as possible, right? They're just like trying to maximize versus a more nuanced approach.
You hit the nail on the head. Like for the longest part of my life and my career, as discussed in your show, it cost me lots because the focus was so sharp on this is what I need to get done, and almost at whatever the cost. Well, it was pretty big cost anyways. But today, as I've matured, and so my next question for you, as you went through your transition, during university, and you had that defining, how have you found your evolution since you started doing men's work, and how has that this men's work affected your life and how you've evolved?
Yeah, so I mean, I swung all over the pendulum. So, coming out of that overdose experience, I went to Naropa University, which is a Buddhist university. It's one of two Buddhist universities in America. It was in Boulder, Colorado. And I swung all the way to kind of like the meek feminine side, right? So like, again, to recap, like born shy, right? Like very quiet, very shut down. Then went all the way to the like toxic, boisterous, sex, drugs, rock and roll, then swung back again to like being this like fake enlightened Buddhist guy where like nothing would touch me, kind of like you said about that stoicism, right? Like I'm like fake stoicism, right? The idea of like, I'm cool, I'm good, I got this spiritual bypassing, like nothing can hurt me. But really that was also fragile. But I like, I wore like mala beads and had like, Aladdin pants and stuff. And then I realized that I felt really empty doing that because what I was doing, I was disassociating, I was disconnecting from everything. And even though I thought I was like above it all, by thinking that I was not touching the ground. I wasn't really in the world. So it was by getting in touch with some of the more classical men literature, specifically a book called Iron John by Robert Bly, which I'm sure probably been mentioned, or King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, some during the men's movement that happened in the late 80s, early 90s. Those guys really spoke to me, and they pointed me even further back in history. So I love that you mentioned stoicism, like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius was a big one. I started actually reading the original Buddhist text instead of just pretending that I did. And like some of those books were like really powerful too, and a lot of Legend of the Five Rings and the Bushido, and like really just trying to be like, what are men into, right? Like what are some of these ancient masculine traditions? And each of them spoke to me in a different way, and that kind of is on the trip I'm on now, which is the idea of like really reclaiming masculinity again, especially for my generation, which is more meek, and finding a healthy way and honor. Really, that traditional view of honor, I think, is something that we need, of like making decisions that are not hedonistic, because I think my generation is very hedonistic. We're very pleasure seeking, and we just seek comfort all the time. And I think that's what a boy does, right? A boy wants to be comfortable and wants to have fun, but a man wants to make commitments and actually like be part of a community. And I think real belonging comes from taking on commitments and responsibilities versus trying to shirk all that. And I spent a lot of my life shirking all that. I was like, oh, too hard, too much a pain in the ass, too inconvenient. I don't want to do it. Yeah. But like, I ended up being super fucking lonely, So I think it's about taking on those commitments and making promises and fulfilling them that really leads to the fulfillment.
I couldn't agree more with you, Marc. I was thinking of that. There's a phrase that I like that Michael Beckwith uses all the time. He talks about our growing edge, and what he means by that is we're constantly evolving and expanding. But if we're not at our growing edge, then we're not really challenging ourselves. And I think, great if you want to be, a Buddhist monk, or spend your life that way, and that's your calling, absolutely 100% go and do that. But if you really want to find out what you're made of, get married, have kids, start a business. Everything that's going to go wrong is going to go wrong. And you find out real quick what you're made of. And I think for me in my journey with doing men's work is I've really found that growing edge for me is gets pretty sharp at times. And you recognize, I don't know if you find that in your journey, that you find out just how much more growth you need to do, because really we're in here leading men, but we're leading ourselves first. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I keep doing the work, because it's about me ultimately, right? I mean, like, I get a lot out of it. I get inspired by my clients every day, and it's like I don't have it all fucking figured out. Like, I'm still learning stuff, For me, back to the King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, like I think I have magician energy. I think I'm building king energy, but my warrior energy is weak as shit. So like, what do? I signed up for CrossFit, right? Like, again, because I had those body image issues growing up, I love food. I need to focus on the areas that I'm weak at, right? Physical exercise, diet, nutrition. That's where my edge is right now. Is like, I can do the philosophy and talk and be a smart dude all day long, but like, if I'm ignoring my body, it doesn't matter. And again, I think a lot of men, a lot of millennials too, like we focus on our strengths and we avoid our weaknesses. I fell into that trap. So my edge right now is like, do the hard work of like going to the gym and getting my ass kicked every, 3 times a week like that. And I hate it. Like that's what it's all about. And to your point, like I think men grow through challenge. We grow through that sharpening process. And as a modern man, we can live a really easy life. There's a lot of jobs that are like kind of bullshit. And there's a lot of ways you could just like order everything on Amazon and be fine and live online and play games. And again, like I could have been that guy. I was very close to being that guy. So no judgment. Like I get it. Without challenge, we don't grow, and we end up becoming weak over time. So as the modern man, we have to pick challenges, right? For a lot of guys, that's sports or, wilderness expeditions or retreats or whatever, right? But like we need to actively seek challenge and bring it into our lives, because if we don't, we're going to be kind of soft, frankly. We're going to be isolated and not ever have to grow.
Absolutely. And I think that's why, what I really liked about those 2 books you mentioned, Iron John and King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, is that they also talked a lot in there about ritual. And because you do these retreats as well, are you finding that when the retreats are happening, that transformation is more pronounced than doing other forms of men's work?
Yes, retreats are the biggest thing. So the way I have a whole other bit on like, how therapy fails men, but, give you the cliff notes, is therapy is just talking and men need experiences, right? I think most men are experiential learners. And the way that we talk, especially in traditional masculine settings, is we brief and we debrief. So a lot of my sessions and a lot of my retreats is we brief, we talk about the retreat, what we're going to do. Usually it's kind of like a feat of strength or a wilderness expedition or a survival challenge. Then we do it. And there's not a lot of talking when you're doing it because you're just like trying not to die, or you're trying to like push yourself, or there's like you're exhausted, right? Like it's hard. I mean, it's hard on design, right? And then there's a debrief, which is the most important part, where you talk about the lessons you learned and parts of yourself that you saw, and maybe some moments and memories where you counted on your brothers to do something. I think the retreats help solidify something, but what we do differently, if I can do a little pitch, I guess, is like we do a lot of integration work. So after you do the retreat, we have a touchdown meeting the next week. Then we have a follow-up meeting 2 weeks after. Then we have a reunion 3 months later, which is the idea of like, okay, you did this thing in the retreat, but like, did you actually change your life? And we're confrontive, we're loving, but we're confrontive of like, for instance, you spent all weekend talking about how you want to divorce your wife. Like, did you do it? Did you do it? Right? You talked about how you want to change your job. Did you do it? You talked about how you were concerned about your kid. Did you make any change? Because, and this is maybe my bias of being from Boulder, Colorado, there's so much this retreat industry, which is like navel gazing, where you can have these really powerful experiences, but it still keeps people stuck. Like it becomes almost like a hobby. It becomes almost like a masturbation, frankly, of like having the big release, having the cathartic moment, but not actually changing it. And I loved what you said earlier. If you really want to be a man, it's like get married, start a business, try to like exercise, do like the basic stuff, because where the rubber meets the road, that's what really matters. Climbing the mountain and screaming at the moon, like that's cool, that's fun, but that's just to be a kickstart to actually make change in your life.
Well, what I like about your talk, what we were talking about there in your program, is that you have this compassionate accountability. And I started using that phrase in our work to move away from, because I had somebody challenging me at one of our groups, is that, they felt that we were judging when we were holding somebody to account, and it just came into my mind at the moment. I said, well, you're the one who said you were going to do this. Right. You said you were going to do this by this date, and yet it's not done. So what's preventing you from doing it? What's the limiting belief? What's the misaligned value? What is happening in your life? What are you afraid of that is preventing you from doing this work? And for some guys, they'll stay in that and they'll stay, and others, they just don't want to deal with their stuff, so they move on. And it's unfortunate when I see that happen with men. And that used to really bother me in the early days. But after a while, I think I talked on your show that, my oldest son has a hard time making healthy decisions around drugs and alcohol, and he's always in a state of perpetual fear and abandonment, and so he just chooses poorly, and I can't live my life through him anymore. And I decided that just a few years ago, and then as I started doing men's work, I recognized similar patterns with some guys that they rather know, they're more comfortable with the devil they know than the one they don't. What are you finding in your work?
I think that's true. I think especially with addiction, it needs to get bad. And for some people, it needs to get really bad. And that sucks when that's your kid. So I have a lot of empathy, as a recovering addict, like it has to get bad. Like I had to fucking die, almost die, to like even see it. And like I had friends that were overdosing. I had friends that literally died. I had close calls with the law because I was selling drugs. I was in jail. Like I had all these messages, and it took like, lips turning blue, fucking waking up in the hospital to like actually make a change. Like that's how bad it has to get for some guys. And mine wasn't even that bad compared to what some other people go through, like homelessness and, abusive relationships and things like that. Right. But it's tough. And I think guys need that wake up call. There's back to stoicism, right? There's a great quote from Meditations where Marcus Aurelius says, the soil doesn't lie. And he talks about how men need this experience. He talked about gardening, where like you either win or you lose, and the soil will not lie to you, right? Like either you grow the tomato or you don't. And like you can't bullshit yourself. And I think, again, an epidemic that a lot of men have, a lot of younger men have, is there's a lot of bullshit out there. There's a lot of people that are holding our hands. There's a lot of people that are lying to us, that are telling us that we did a good job when we really didn't, that are holding back feedback, because they're afraid it's going to hurt our feelings. They're playing nice. So I love that you talk about that compassionate accountability, because I think men need that mirror. We're so hungry for it. And again, a mirror doesn't judge you. It's just a mirror. It's just saying like, hey, this is what I see. You do with it what you want, but like, this is what I see. And I think if a man can take that in, he will feel nourished in a way that he's never felt. He'll feel loved because he's really being seen. He's being seen warts and all. And it's, again, that thing I talked about before of like being the challenger and the coach. It's like, you made this commitment to me. You didn't make it. That's okay. Maybe that challenge was too hard. Either we adjust the challenge or I need to coach you better. How can I coach you better? Because I want you to get to whatever this place is, And I think that ultimately builds respect between men is like having that, like, again, masculine intimacy. I think women connect in different ways, but I think men really connect by like helping each other do great things. So yeah, and some guys, again, the cocoon is thick, some guys like that hasn't quite gotten to them yet. It needs to get worse. And the best thing we can do, even though it's the most painful thing, especially as a parent, is to step away and like let their life get worse while maintaining like, hey, when you need me, I'm there. No questions asked, no judgment. I'm 100% in your corner, but like you need to reach out, like they need to initiate the help. And it's
completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think really what we're talking about is how it's just different ways that we create our own suffering, right? Like to me, the idea of suffering is a choice. Will we, when we feel pain, will we suffer? Absolutely. And we will in the moment, and maybe it'll last a little longer than a moment. But if we're still suffering over days, weeks, months, years, that's a choice. And I don't have the educational training background you have, but that's been my personal philosophy, and it's what's helped me get through some of the darkest times in my life. And so I know you talk a little bit about this, about how people create their own suffering, and so how would you help somebody who's in that position break free from it?
So the first step is mindfulness. So I can talk from my personal experience is like I can wallow. I suffer from depression. I'm on medication. I take Wellbutrin. But sometimes I can get in a real pity party, and I can get in a place where I don't want to say anything. I don't express myself. I push everybody away. Like that happens to me. I can wallow. So what I've decided, and with the help of my therapist, back to CrossFit, which I mentioned before, is to work on it every day in a micro way. And this is advice for maybe some of your listeners that suffer with this. So for instance, CrossFit, right? For those not familiar, it fucking sucks. And you do these like really intense workouts, but they only last like 15 minutes. Right? They're short, but it's HIIT training, right? It's high intensity interval training, but it's really intense. And, I'm at a, pretty progressive gym where like you can take breaks, right? I mean, if you can't do it, you can take a break and you can catch your breath. And what I'm working on with my mindfulness practice is noticing the moment when I can re-engage in the workout, right? And sometimes so I need to take a break, right? I'm still working on my fitness, but there's sometimes where I go past that moment and I'm just fucking around, right? I'm like running out the clock. I'm looking around at people. I'm like psyching myself up. Like I've transitioned into that suffering thing that you're talking about where it is a choice, right? I needed to take a break, but I didn't have to extend it for that long. So for me, that's my mental health challenge is like catching that moment and trying to re-engage as fast as possible, right? Knowing when I'm making that change. So I think the micro is really helpful for guys because it's like super tangible. But that can then be extrapolated into mental suffering of like, stuff's going to hurt. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to grieve. In fact, a modern man is okay with grief and welcomes grief and sees grief as a learning. Like there's nothing wrong with it. It's a beautiful thing. But there is a moment where it becomes wallowing. And I think most guys on some level know when they're in that place. And it takes, again, that compassion and accountability. I really love that phrase. Like it takes that mirror either from a coach or a therapist or, a men's leader or men's mentor like yourself or a friend, or if not yourself, to be like, I'm kind of wallowing right now. I'm kind of being lazy. I'm kind of using this as an excuse. And you get to decide, like, what kind of man do you want to be, right? Like falling off the horse is okay, but you got to get back on. You got to get back on. You can't live on the ground,
Absolutely. It's, it's about getting up and keeping the ball moving forward, right? And, really what these are great key components that we're talking about. And I think the other thing that we've been really dancing around the edges of this one is that I want to bring to our conversation now is talking about the importance of relationship for men and having those healthy masculine relationships. And so let's talk a little bit of, why that's important, why you need to engage deeply with this as men, and how it can really grow our communities.
It's the most important thing, right? So like part of the mission that I have, and I think it's part of your mission after I've seen some of your stuff, is like recreating male space and really honoring male space. Because again, I think like with the feminist movement that I'm a big fan of, feminism is phenomenal, but I think it really demonized male space and it really shut it down. It made it be like, oh, it's the locker room. It's guys being gross or saying shitty things about women or like being misogynistic. And look, that happens. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't happen. That happens 100%. But it's not just that. It is also these moments that you've been talking about of like, hey man, I'm worried about you, or hey, how do we fix this shit in your life? Or like, hey, I noticed that you've been drinking a lot at work. Like, what's going on? Like, those moments in male space are really, really critical. And it's not just like fucking about. And I think being in male exclusive space is critical because, like I said, we're apex predators. We have like extreme sex drives, most of us. We have a hunter-killer mentality. We are violent creatures. We keep that to ourselves because we're not psychos. But like being with other guys lets us express some of those more primal parts of our nature in a place that's safe, that can hold it. Whether that's in ritual setting or through metaphor or through storytelling, or even through like video games where you get to run around and shoot people for fucking 4 hours. Like as men, we need those outlets for aggression, and we need guys that can not just like tolerate it, but bond through it, because then the intimacy can happen. So again, doesn't matter what you do, but do something, right? Like physical, video game, connection, arts, crafts, spirituality. I don't care, but like be with other guys and try to be open with them because they get it in a way that like the women in your life don't. And I think the modern man puts all of that onto his partner, and we'll talk heterosexual just for simplicity. They puts it on his wife, right? They put it on the female, try to understand the male experience. And like the fact of the matter is like they do not understand you. They can empathize. They can sometimes say the right thing. I think they're really helpful 100%. I love my wife, but like they do not get it in the way that another guy gets it. And it's not a substitute. It's an addition. It's great to have a supportive woman in your life, but it's not a substitute for like a guy that like knows what it's like to be us.
Yeah. And at times, I truly believe that it can be detrimental to that relationship if it's not done right. And right meaning if you're the type of guy who's never had a deep conversation with your wife, and now you decide you're doing a little bit of men's work, maybe you're getting some therapy or some work's happening for yourself, and then you decide you're just going to spill all your guts with her, brother, I don't think that's the right way to do that just yet. Get your crap together and then, work on stuff that's less, the stakes aren't as high. That you can, work your way into a position to have something that's much more difficult, bigger challenge that has higher stakes involved. And so I think, it's really important that we manage that relationship correctly. Because I think it can have a real profound impact on our marriages for sure.
100%, right? Like women want a man, they don't want a child.
That's right.
And I think like just what you're saying, I see it happen so many times. The guy gets excited, they start sharing, they start trauma dumping, they start like kind of like crumbling, and the woman loses all attraction and respect for them. And it's like a sad truth because I think women say they want our feelings, but they don't want it in that way. They don't want us being pathetic.
Yeah.
Again, they want that Martin Luther King. They want that, Winston Churchill. They want that impassioned, feeling-centered man that can like leverage and use emotions and like has mastery and can ride the waves and can be there. But they don't want like the sniveling, person.
Yes.
And I think like, it's a whole other conversation, but I think like a lot of ancient traditional cultures, you would become a man in communities of men. You would leave your family, leave your mother, frankly, right?
Yeah.
And like become a man with other men. I really do think that only a man can make you a man, right? And then you can to your woman, right? You can then return and be the man in the relationship. But the mother energy only takes you so far. It took you the first 14 years of your life, but it can't take you all the way there.
That's right. I completely agree. I was just thinking about, we did a couple of years ago, we did a lesson series on G.S. Youngblood's book, The Masculine in Relationship. And what a profound shift. It's probably the most engaged
Yeah.
group sessions we had, those 30 sessions that we did over his book. And it was actually exactly what you're talking about right there, Marc. It's about really, being in a leadership role, right? And understanding what it means to lead our spouses, our partners. And so, when we don't understand that and we haven't decoupled, effectively from our mothers, then we'll struggle with that. And so I think a lot of us guys have gone through that. I think that's pretty common, and it's maybe even more prevalent today with your generation, with millennials, because as we didn't want to say anything to upset our children. Everybody gets a prize for competing. No, there was no winners. We don't keep score anymore. We don't, because we had to protect little Johnny's feelings so that he can grow up what we think is healthy. And what we've really done is done a disservice to him, because the world's a cruel place. Little Johnny realized real fast when he leaves that life isn't fair. We have to teach our men today what it means, what happens when life isn't fair, and how we can rebound.
Yeah, and how to get better, right? Like in your story, like little Johnny, because he was never told that he needed to get better, he never learned how to learn.
Yeah.
Right. Versus again, like the message I keep saying is like thing to say is not like, hey Johnny, you're a loser because you're slow, but like, hey Johnny, I noticed that you're in the back half of the pack. Like, how can we get you to the front half? Yeah. Right? Like teaching men that there is a hierarchy. You can't just like ignore that, but like you can climb it. You can get better at stuff. I think a lot of millennials, like we all thought that we were the best at everything. And then, we hit the real world and it's like, oh shit, yeah, we actually suck at a lot of stuff. We suck at a lot of stuff, because we never learned how to learn.
Well, yeah, exactly. 100%. Yeah. I'm sure through your course of your life, Marc, you've had one or two mentors that have really impacted your life. And so what's been the best piece of advice you've been given, and how is it still serving you today?
God, there's so many mentors. I mean, the ones that come to mind, my current mentor is a man named Rick Tivers, who is my therapist and mentor, and he's been my couples counselor, and we co-facilitate retreats. Like we do all kinds of shit together. And then my very first therapist, Dr. Jeff Beyer, was big, and he like really showed me masculine love and showed me the idea of giving a shit and having these kind of fireside chats that like I never had, growing up. My dad's awesome, but he's very masculine, but he shows his love through acts of service, not through like emotional connection. And I always had this fantasy, probably from books and movies, of like, sitting on the campfire and getting like the talk about like life, and never quite got that. I got a lot of other real good stuff from him. Now I do love him a ton. But yeah, as far as like advice, I think, and we mentioned it before, it's the idea of like real courage means being afraid. Mm. I think that's really what I would say. And what really changed my life is like not seeing fear as something to avoid, but something to embrace. And just because I feel afraid doesn't mean I shouldn't do something.
Right.
Because again, as someone who was bullied, as someone that lived in a lot of fear, as someone that has struggled with anxiety and depression in different times of my life, like my fear would shut me down because I thought that was wrong. That is what was wrong with me. Right. I thought I was a coward. I thought like other people didn't feel afraid. I thought that everybody was super confident. And like, I just wasn't. I'm still not. I mean, I can project it, but like, it's the idea of like being able to operate while afraid, I think is the big thing. Not letting it control you, I think is probably the biggest advice. And lessons. I mean, there's so many retreat experiences and spiritual shit I've done that like evokes fear on purpose so that you can then learn how to work with it. Right. So like, that's been helpful for me too. It's like not just the advice, but the like lived experience of overcoming fear again and again.
Love that. Absolutely. That's an outstanding piece of advice. And so what a great way to wrap up our conversation here today, Marc. So I want to say thanks a lot, my friend, for being on the show and really showing us, how we can be just much more productive and what it really looks like to be a modern man. And I think a modern man, whatever era, however old, whatever our age is, however old we are, we can become modern men and really embrace the idea of what true healthy masculinity looks like. And so if men are interested in getting a hold of you and participating in your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, best thing is go to the website. It's menstherapy.online. We have the individual work, we have the groups, we have retreats. We also have a ton of free shit. So like, just like look at that. We have like a podcast that, Alan's been on. We have, online courses. A couple of them are free. We have like, all the social media stuff that's giving you motivation. Like, in my journey, I had a lot of digital mentors and virtual mentors, influencers and authors, all throughout history that I was mentioning. And like, I'd be honored if I could be one seat at the table, one voice for you. So like, obviously we want you to come to the stuff. We're taking the services, but like, just check out the stuff, men's therapy done online. Maybe something speaks to you.
So anyway, I'm going to make sure that's on in these show notes, as well as anywhere else that you are on social media, to make sure folks can get a chance to get a hold of you. Once again, Marc, thank you so much for being on the show, brother. Really loved our conversation today.
Thank you so much. It's a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.